Hi everyone, Nick from Accounting Add-ons here, and in this video I'll show you how to get Excel data into Power BI so that it can be refreshed online. And we'll use OneDrive Personal to provide this Excel data. Now if you've tried getting Excel data into Power BI, you might have found that while it works perfectly well on the desktop, it complains about errors once it's online. We'll be using OneDrive Personal to work around this issue, but saying that, if you've got access to SharePoint, we recommend you use that instead. Let's get into it. So before we go through and show you how to fix the problem, we'll show you why the problem occurs in the first place. Now I've got an empty Power BI dashboard here, and most people typically will pull data from Excel using the Import Data from Excel button. They'll then browse to their file they want to import. I'll use my test file here, and they'll click Open. And what this will do is it'll allow them to pull the tables of Excel data into their workbook. Now this looks like it works beautifully at a cursory glance, but the issue that you get is the way the data is pulled is not going to work on the cloud. If I right click on my query and choose Edit Query, you'll actually see in the source navigation step that it uses this function, excel.workbook, file.contents, and then it passes the path to the actual file that I've browsed. Now the issue you'll get is that that file path will be local machine based, as in this file is actually on my D drive under a test folder and it's called test.xlsx. Now if I publish it to the cloud, Power BI Online won't have access to that file, therefore the refresh won't be able to be scheduled and it won't work. You won't be able to configure it. So to fix that, you either have to pull that Excel file from SharePoint or OneDrive Personal. And I'll show you how to do it through OneDrive Personal. The only thing that'll need to be changed is that file.contents instruction. It'll need to become a web.contents instruction, and instead of pointing to the D drive, we'll point to onedrive.live.com. So first up, I'll go to onedrive.live.com and I'll log in. I'll go to my Documents folder and I'll choose to upload a file. I'll navigate to where that test file is and I'll upload it to the cloud. And once the file's in the cloud, I can click on the ... vertical button and I can choose Embed. And this will generate some HTML code that I can use to actually embed this file into Power BI. Now the reason I've blurred the URL in the video is that that URL includes a direct link to the data, and it won't require any login to access the data. So in other words, anyone who's got access to that URL can actually download the Excel file. So as such, if you use that URL, make sure you don't share it with anyone else, and make sure you try to keep it as secret as possible. And you'll also need to clean up that URL because it can't be used outright by Power BI. So I'll copy this and I'll go to my notepad and I'll paste it in. Now we want to keep only the source src parameter. Everything in front can be removed, including the double quote, and everything after the double quote can also be removed. We'll change the embed to be a download instruction, and we'll append at the very end of this URL &app equals Excel. Now the URL can actually be used in Power BI, and it's a cloud-based URL, which means that the data will be accessible from anywhere on the internet. Now that we've got the URL, I'll show you a few different ways that you can actually update your workbook to make use of that URL. First up, I'll copy it. I'll then return to my Power BI dashboard. And in the original introduction where I showed you the file.contents and the hard-coded path, I can actually change this to be web.contents and put the hard-coded path in between double quote and hit enter. When it finishes refreshing, it'll actually show you the same tables down the page. And if I hit the refresh button here, you'll actually see very quickly that it actually still refreshes and doesn't throw up any errors. So that's one approach to update an existing feed to point to the web equivalent of that file on OneDrive Personal. Now another approach is I can right click in the query section, choose new query, and choose web. I can then paste my URL in and click OK, and it shall bring the same tables down the page. So I can select my table 1 and I click OK. And this will essentially do all the previous steps exactly the same. So you'll actually see this source query is exactly the same as this one here. So that's another approach. Now that approach works if your file is fairly small. If it's too large, you might end up having errors, and you should be able to persevere through. But if that doesn't work, there's a third option you can use. Now the third option is to actually create the blank query from scratch. Now I'll roughly show you how to do it, but in a nutshell, it's just a matter of mimicking this formula that you see here. So first thing, we'll right click, new query, blank query. We'll make it equal to Exccel.workbook. We'll pass web.contents. We'll put our URL in there, and in between the two closing parentheses, we'll put comma null, comma false. We'll click out, and this will actually connect to the cloud, pull our data. We can then click on, let's say, table 1 instead of sheet 1. We'll click on table 1, and then we've actually navigated to our data. And that is essentially the exact same steps, except done manually. So it doesn't really matter what approach you take, all three approaches will end up with the exact same formulas and the same result. What we can now do is close and apply, wait for the data to load. Once the data is loaded, I'll create a very simple table. I'll drag my fields in, just so we've got something to appear, and I'll show you how to configure it online. So I'll go File, Publish, Publish to Power BI. I'll hit Save. I'll choose my workspace, and I'll wait for it to be published. I can then go to my browser, go to app.powerbi.com. I can go to my workspace, find the actual data set relating to what I've just published, which is Sample Power BI Dashboard, and I'll choose Settings. Now under Data Source Credentials, I'll have one entry for web because that's the web.contents that I created. I'll choose Edit Credentials. I can actually see the URL partly there, hard-coded in, and I just have to make sure it's set to anonymous access and most likely organizational. I'll click Sign In to make sure that it can connect, and you can see that it's been successful. And after that, I should be able to set up a scheduled refresh, or I should be able to refresh it on demand. So that's it for the video. I hope you found it interesting, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.